Welcome back. In this video, we'll be talking about Azure Kubernetes cluster. So let's go ahead and start. So for this specific lab, I have created a different resource group, which is named as Kubernetes RG. So to create this resource group, you can just click create, and here you can just give the name and the relevant region that you want. So in this case, I have used Kubernetes RG and then reviewed and created. So once my resource group has been created, let's click that. And this is the cluster that has been created. So let me show you how this is done. It's still in the process. So once your resource group has been created, let's create the resources. So in the marketplace, you can just search for Kubernetes, and let's wait. So this is the cluster that you have got. So you can click here and you can create from here as well. So basically, if you talk about the Kubernetes cluster, it's a managed platform that allows you to deploy, scale, and manage containerized applications using Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is an open source container orchestration system that automates the deployment, scaling, and management of containerized applications. So that is the definition of Azure Kubernetes. And you can also read as well. You can see the service is quickest path from zero to Kubernetes on Azure. This service is a feature on Azure hosted control plane, automated upgrades, self-healing, easy scaling, and so on. So you can create from here. And so you can add here, or the other method you can just search for Kubernetes, and you can see just click the Kubernetes service, and even you can create from here as well. So if I click create, you can see there is different options. So coming to the first one, which is a create Kubernetes cluster. So when you create this Kubernetes cluster, you can create a new cluster from the scratch, either on premises or in the cloud. So this involves provisioning the necessary infrastructure, configuring the Kubernetes control plane, and setting up the worker nodes. So you are responsible for managing and maintaining the entire infrastructure and Kubernetes control plane. On the other hand, if you see the second option, which is adding a Kubernetes cluster with Azure Arc. So with this Azure Arc, you can manage Kubernetes cluster running anywhere, including on-premises, multi-cloud, or at the edge. So when you add a Kubernetes cluster with Azure Arc, you can connect it with the Azure control plane, which allows you to use Azure services like Azure Policy, Azure Security Center, which is now called as Defender for Cloud, and Azure Monitor to manage and monitor your clusters. So you can also use Azure Arc to deploy and manage Azure Kubernetes Service clusters on your on-premises or multi-cloud infrastructure. So coming to the third one, which is create an AKS hybrid cluster. So for this cluster, Azure Kubernetes and Kubernetes running on-premises or in other clouds. So when you create an AKS hybrid cluster, you can deploy and manage a Kubernetes cluster on your on-premises infrastructure or another cloud, and then connect to AKS running in Azure. So this enables you to manage your hybrid deployment using the same Azure portal, CLI, or API. So that is the difference between these three. So let's go ahead and click the first one, which is creating Azure clusters. So make sure that you have another correct subscription, and coming to the resource group, you have to select here. So it's Kubernetes RG. So click that, and coming to the cluster preset configurations, you have different options here. So you can compare these options and select accordingly. So if you select the first one, standard, you can see we have cluster auto scaling and availability zones, as well as Azure Monitor. So and the API server availability. So based on your needs, you can select the appropriate option, whether standard or dev or test or cost optimized or batch processing or hardened access. So based on your needs, you have to select it. So in this case, I'll just leave it as default, which is the standard one. So let's go to the Kubernetes cluster. So in this case, I'll just click as AKS cluster 1. So once it is done, let's leave it as East US. And coming to the automatic upgrades. So it's a useful feature in Kubernetes that helps to streamline the process of upgrading the cluster to new version, making it easier for administrators to keep their clusters up to date and secure. So if you click here, you have different options. So the recommended one is enable with the patch, which I'll be selecting. However, you have other options, which is enable with stable, with rapid, and node image, and also you can disable it, but you have to manually do these upgrades. So I'll just leave it as default as of now. And if we go down, we have manual as well as auto scale. So if we talk about the manual, It involves manually adjusting the number of replicas or nodes in your Kubernetes cluster to meet the demands of your application. So manual scaling is suitable for applications with predictable traffic patterns or when the workload is relatively stable. So if you know your workload, you can just add manual and add the node count accordingly. On the other hand, if you want to choose auto scale, so it's a feature that automatically adjusts the number of replicas or nodes in your Kubernetes cluster based on your current workload demands. So auto scaling is useful for applications with variable traffic patterns or when there are sudden spikes in traffic. So auto scaling can be configured based on various metrics such as CPU usage, memory usage, or custom metrics. So Azure Kubernetes Service AKS, which provides auto scaling feature that can automatically adjust the number of worker nodes in the cluster based on the CPU and the memory usage. So saying that, let's leave it as auto scale and maximum node as 5, and let's go to the next option, which is node poles. So if we talk about these node poles, it's a group of worker nodes that has the same configuration and characteristics. So a worker node is a virtual or physical machine that runs the containers and workloads in the Kubernetes cluster. So node pools are useful in the Kubernetes cluster because they allow you to configure different types of worker nodes for different purposes, such as optimizing for cost, performance, or specific workloads. For example, you can create one node pool with high performance virtual machines for running CPU intensive workloads, and other node pools with lower performance virtual machines for running less demanding workloads. So based on that, you can just add more pools if you want. And coming to the next one, which is virtual nodes. You can enable these virtual nodes. So basically, if you talk about the virtual nodes are a feature that allows you to run container workloads in Azure container instance alongside with your regular Kubernetes workloads. So virtual nodes are essentially a way to expand the capacity of your Kubernetes cluster without having to provision and manage additional worker nodes. So when you create a virtual nodes in AKS, Azure automatically provisions and manage an ACI instance for running containers. So this means that you can run your Kubernetes workloads on both your regular worker nodes and virtual nodes in ACI, depending on the specific requirements of your application. So the benefit of using these virtual nodes is that it provides you with additional capacity for running containers workloads without having to manage the underlying infrastructure. So that is what it is. So I'll just come into the encryption. I'll just leave it as default, where encryption at rest with platform managed key, or you can use the customer managed key. If you select it, you have to add this disk encryption set. So I'll just leave it as default in this case. And let's go to the next one, which is access, which I'll be leaving it as default. So based on your needs, you can just select whether local accounts with Kubernetes RBAC or Azure AD authentication with Kubernetes RBAC or Azure AD authentication with Azure RBAC. So I'll just leave it as default as of now. And let's go to the next one, which is a network. Talk about network configurations. If we talk about Kubernetes and Azure CNI. So coming to the Kubernetes, it's a simple and easy to use networking solution for the Kubernetes. On the other hand, if we talk about Azure CNI, it provides more advanced features and better performance for Kubernetes clusters running on Azure. So in this case, I'll just leave it as default, which is Kubernetes, and I'll just leave everything as default. If you have registry, you can add here, but in this case, I'll just leave it as default and review and create it. So since I've already done this one, so I'll just go back. The validation has been passed because there are no errors here. So you can just create it. So let me go back here, and this is the one that has been created. So you can how you can create your Kubernetes cluster. So coming to this video, I hope you guys understood the concept of today's video. If you've liked the video, please click the like button below, and if you're not subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe to my channel and please share the video. Thanks everyone.